Welcome to Inspiring Hope with Lois Herman, a leading expert in professional coaching, clinical hypnosis, and energy clearing. Lois is an award-winning author of Chronicles of Hope. She has decades of experience in advanced hypnosis techniques, has conducted highly effective success coaching programs that have helped clients discover ways to achieve success, empower themselves, their families, as well as holistic practitioners to expand their practices. Get ready to be empowered with your host, Lois Herman.
Good morning and welcome to Inspiring Hope. I am your host, Lois Herman, and I hope to inspire you with positive messages and celebrate everyday people who are making a difference in our world. When we focus our thoughts and energies on what we love to do, we create powerful shifts that cause us to be more positive and peaceful. As we lift our energy, we empower everyone around us. If we each do what we can to make small shifts in awareness, from kindness to healthy habits and simple happiness, we create ripples of hope. Join us as catalysts for positive change for our families, our communities, and our world at large. I hope you are inspired by today's show. And today we are going to be talking about creativity. One of the hallmarks of our roadmap for hope is being creative, of taking care of our earth. We've talked about that before. And today we're talking about being creative, finding ways to be creative. So what do you do to be creative? You know, at home we can work with puzzles. We can do some crafts or sewing. When I was growing up, we made our own clothes. My mother was a master. We would go and we would purchase a pattern, and then we would select the fabric. And she was really good at redesigning the pattern so that I could actually make a mini skirt with a half a yard of fabric. Of course, that was back in the 70s when mini skirts were fairly common. But we would also make our own cookies and cakes and pies. And nowadays, it's so much easier just to go to the store and buy things. And that's because we are such a fast-paced society. But taking the time to actually make cookies, I have friends who do that, and there's just something different about the energy that's in a homemade cookie. Even if it might not be quite done or a little burned, it doesn't matter. It's the whole concept of taking the time to be creative. And in this pattern of being creative, one of the things that we have to look at is dealing with people who in some ways squelch our creativity. There is so much anger and hate out there, people who say mean things and do mean things, everything from politics to the media to our community, our families, our associates at work. And what I would inspire you to do is to come from a place of honesty, integrity, and truth. When someone is mired in anger and hate, you need to realize that they are coming from something that happened to them in their life that created their own self-loathing, and they're looking for an innocent victim to spew on. And what I would encourage you to do is to send them positivity, protect yourself from their energy, and come from a place of integrity. Get into your creative abilities and let them deal with their own karma. They will have to deal with what they are doing to others when it comes time for their life review. They are damaging their own internal spirit by their anger and their hate. What I would encourage you to do is to steer clear of that and to surround yourself with positive people who are inspiring you, who do encourage you, because they're coming from a place of kindness and compassion. We also need to come from a place of kindness and compassion. We don't want to, as they say, sink to the other person's level. When someone is coming from hate and anger, if we respond with hate and anger, that lowers our energy. And you don't want to do that. You come from a higher place of energy. See them with, compassion, with sadness, with that's so sad that they are so stuck in their mire. Release yourself from their energy and find something to do to be creative. Now, right now, what I'm doing is I'm creating Chronicles of Hope Book 2, and the message that I just gave you came from what the guides are telling me in the chapter I'm writing in this book. We need to avoid all of that anger and hate because it's damaging to our eternal selves. Another thing that I want to just share, because as I said, in my childhood, we made our own clothes, we made cookies and pies and cakes, and my son even used to go around with his little red wagon, and Rich is going to tell us about his son too in a minute, but he used to go to neighbors when we would put our recycles out. Once a week, and he would go and he would find treasures in the neighbors' recycle bins, and he'd come home and we went through a lot of duct tape. And he would make creative things, and it was wonderful. I thought someday he'd be an inventor, and maybe he will someday. But in my own past, I used to restore old Victorians. I've always seen these old dilapidated houses with the charm of what if we could fix them back up. I spent many years restoring old Victorians and I had an old New Englander, 1770s, that I worked to restore. And people would come in and go, wow, this is amazing. I even at one point built a new home using old materials. So I would go to the salvage yards and find mantles and beautiful stained glass and doors, old doors and staircases. And I created a new Victorian, and people would walk through and say, is this a restoration? And I think, yes, that's the key, is to get these old beautiful pieces that are being neglected and cast aside and recreate using these beautiful old pieces of architecture. That was a very rewarding time for me. And I want to just interrupt for a minute and let you know that you are listening to Inspiring Hope with Lois Herman. This is WSMN 1590. We're here every Sunday morning with inspiring messages for you and spotlighting amazing people that I have come to know in my path. And I also am talking about creativity. And I actually had a fascinating career in the field of diagnostic ultrasound. And I actually had the privilege of designing and developing ultrasound systems. When I first started doing this, the engineers had designed a system based on a computer keyboard with a trackball, so everything was linear. They came to me at one point with a big blank piece of paper and said, please design what you would imagine as your own ultrasound system. Now, when you're doing an ultrasound, one hand is holding a transducer and you're scanning the person. So the other hand is the one that's operating the keyboard. And you're looking at a screen, so you can't really look at the keyboard. So what I did is I developed a pattern around the trackball to where my fingers would touch the keys like playing a piano. Anyway, 4 years later, the Image Point was born, and I had patents in my name, or I was named on patents for the design of that system. And that design, if you look at any ultrasound system out there in this day, this was 20 years ago, that design has held through all of the ultrasound systems because you're playing it. It is an ultrasound. It's a musical instrument. Yes, we're using physics and anatomy. We're having to pay attention to anatomy and pathophysiology, but you're playing a musical instrument. So I designed it with these amazing engineers as a computer-based system, ultrasound sound system. And then I actually went on to work for a company that was hired to create battlefield ultrasound, handheld ultrasound device. And what we did is we were creating the triage. Think of the tricorder. So I ended up developing the interface on a laptop computer for a handheld ultrasound machine that we ended up selling them, using them for the ambulance drivers. For if you get just a simple handheld ultrasound scan in an emergency room, that was the system that I designed. And I had the very, very honor and privilege of being the first person to install it on the space shuttle. I went to NASA and installed the ultrasound system, this remote handheld device on the space shuttle at Mission Control, which was really fascinating, and taught them how to use it. So I have patents in my name for that. So I'm very familiar with the whole engineering background and the concept of designing and working with engineers, and I'm fascinated by how their minds work. I was the subject matter expert on the design team as we were working together And I have an immense appreciation for the engineering mind. And so between that, and I consider myself to be a creative person, not artistic, but creative. I actually at one point had my own garden company, Scheffler's Gardenscapes, and I was designing gardens. I've long loved to garden. That's another creative outlet. Get out in the garden and play, getting your hands dirty, get in touch with Mother Nature. And I remember distinctly designing a garden for a friend of mine who had a paralyzed son. So I created a bird and butterfly garden for her son who was in a wheelchair, so that all the birds and butterflies and the fragrances were right there near his bedroom window. She also had a rough and tumble son, so I created a sports garden for him with all the prickly things so that if he were to step on them, he would avoid them. And she also had a very introverted bookworm daughter, and I created a secret garden for her to where she could escape into her books. So to this day, I hear from them saying how wonderful all the flowers that bloom at different times of the year. So I loved being creative with using the beautiful beauty of Mother Nature. So I wanted to share that with you because I'm going to segue. You're listening to Inspiring Hope with Lois Herman, and each week we spotlight a wonderful member of our community who is doing amazing things to inspire others. And I have in the studio today a gentleman who does landscaping, who is an engineer, and is an amazing creative inventor. So I would like to introduce Richard Kahn. Rich, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, thank you, Lois. I do have a very eclectic background. I'd like to preface who I am and what I've done with what you mentioned about your parents creating clothing. And my mom was the same way. And one of the things I credit both my parents for is there was no such thing as men's work or women's work. It was any knowledge, even some intimate topics everything was fair game. If I asked a legitimate question, and my mom taught me how to cook and how to sew.
Wonderful.
And my dad taught me how to cook and use power tools. And you mentioned bringing things home from people's recycle bins. Okay. And I had sort of a humorous experience. I remember going to the town dump with my little radio red cart, and my brother and I would take home this big console TV because, of course, that's all there was back then, and we'd take it apart, just pull parts out of it and put the carcass back on by the curb. And I envisioned the trash people coming by. Didn't we just throw this thing out last week or something like that? And then my son now, well, even back when he was a child, was kind of the same way. We avoided giving him all the crass commercial products. Not because we were cheap, but because he got a lot of stuff from relatives. But the things he played with the most were the toilet paper and paper towel tubes. And he made, at I think about 8 years old, he made a pretty good replica of the Starship Enterprise out of aluminum foil.
Wow.
And rather than get upset with him for wasting certain things, I said, maybe we ought to just buy him more aluminum foil so he could play and we would have it if we needed it to cook. And he is very much an artist now. And he's apprenticing to be a tattoo artist. And we had, not the profession we would have chosen for him, but hey, two things, as you mentioned at the beginning, honesty and integrity. We had to make sure he had honesty and a work ethic. If he handled those two things, everything else would fall into place. My background, I have an undergraduate degree in computer systems engineering, a master's in education. I run a landscaping business. I've worked as a software engineer, computer programmer, short and long-term substitute teacher, math and science tutor. I've run for political office, so I won't go into that, but at the local, state, and federal level. Father of a wonderful son, beautiful daughter-in-law, and grandfather of two beautiful girls. The thing I'd like to talk most about is not just about me as an inventor, but why people don't often pursue patents or other forms of creativity, and give some inspiration so people will not be negative on themselves and maybe pursue things they would not have otherwise pursued.
Exactly. Because if we don't do what we're called to do, there, and I'm really not great at exact quotes, but there's a quote from someone that says, it's the things we wished we had done at the end of our life that we most regret, that we need to pursue. If we have something in our heart that we'd like to pursue it, go ahead and try it. There is no harm in that. It's those things that we, at the end of our life, we look back and say, I wished I had done that we have the most regret for. So you've done some pretty interesting, you've created some pretty interesting things, haven't you?
Yes, and I know we only have don't have several hours to spend on this. One of the things, I make stuff out of stuff. I have the most joy when I'm making things out of other people's cast-offs.
Yes.
Not just going out and buying the materials and making whatever, which I have done, but that to me is a big deal. I make clocks out of things. All right. And that all started with somebody making fun of me. I went to a local repair shop in Hudson to have one of my power tools fixed, and on the way in, the owner of the store was testing a chainsaw he just fixed, slicing wafers off this log with a chainsaw he just repaired. And the first thing I noticed was the log was almost perfectly round. I said, hey, John, what do people use those wafers for? Do you have anybody use for them? Yeah, I got a guy comes by and make clocks out of them. And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so I walk in, drop my tool off. On the way out, he says, actually, Rich, I was just kidding about the clocks. So I grabbed a few of those wafers. I went down to Michael's, the craft store, and picked up a clock movement from them. I sanded both sides of the wafer, put some polyurethane on it, put my business card on it, polyurethaned it some more, put the clock movement on it. And I brought in and showed, hey, John, what do you think? Oh, not bad. This is what you were throwing out. And I tell you what, I'll give it to you if you display it where customers can see it.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since, I've made clocks out of everything from automotive brake rotors, ceiling light fixtures, and my most unusual one was probably made from a bathroom scale, because I took it apart. I used the dial that registers the weight and use that instead of hands. And the most unusual thing about it is that it runs backwards, but still keeps perfect time.
How fascinating. I want to interrupt you for just a second to tell you a clock story along the same lines. My husband, in New England, we have this tradition at holiday time of a Yankee swap gift, where everybody brings something. There's a name in the middle, and then you pull a name, and you trade the gift. Well, evidently, this one family gathering that he attended, somebody brought at the last minute. They forgot their gift, so they stopped at one of the local chains and bought a pizza. So they brought the pizza in, and somebody got that for the Yankee swap.
A real pizza?
A real pizza. The next year, so this community group met every year. The next year, someone brought the pizza back with a clock movement in it. They made the pizza because it just, some of those pizzas, they don't rot, they harden.
Oh
they're not real food. So they brought it back as a clock. And so every year somebody would embellish this pizza. They would swap it, and then somebody who got it would bring it back with a different embellishment.
No one tried to eat it.
Oh, no. So I get what you're saying, that you can be creative with these things. That's awesome.
Well, and if I may, basically, usually there's, at these Yankee swaps, I've been to a few, there's always the one gift that everybody seems to want.
Right.
And then they draw a name and they end up with a gift, and then they go after the person who's got the thing they want.
Exactly.
And I was proud to say, I used to be in a Toastmasters, a public speaking group, and I created, surprise, surprise, a clock. And I had the face, in place of the numbers, I had the face of each of the members of the Toastmasters group. And the message on the clock was time for Toastmasters. And I'm proud to say that that was the gift that everybody wanted.
That's awesome.
And so the creative piece is that sometimes it's, as you were saying at the beginning, there's the negative self-talk, and I'd like to let people know that if you have an idea, go for it. And I've actually helped people do things like, I have this idea. And I say, have you even looked at doing a little informal patent search on your own? Go to the patent office website, and I've shown people how to do searches, an informal search, and to see whether maybe somebody invented something like it already. Go to YouTube, see if anything. And then sometimes people go to YouTube and they say, yeah, it kind of does the same thing, but mine's way better. Mm-hmm. Well, go for it.
Right.
And there's people that have trusted. Would you like me to talk about why people don't sometimes get patents?
Well, tell us about the patent that you have on the tell us
Sifter.
about your sifter. Yeah, I want to hear about that. That's pretty ingenious.
It's right in line with you mentioned your joy of gardening.
Yes.
Well, I was working at a customer's property, and I was two tasks that seemed like they were related. I was edging the front flower beds, getting them ready for fresh bark mulch, and a lot of the turf I was taking out had some good loam that was attached to it. And I said, boy, it would be great if I could separate the loam from the chaff. So what I did was, and he also had some sinkholes in the backyard. So I came up with the idea, and I tested the prototype at his property, and I would take the chaff that I separated out, fill the sinkhole to a few inches of the surface, and then the loam that I had taken off would cover the rest of it to fill the sinkhole, rather than just haul the stuff that I edged out into the woods or haul it away. So I reused what was already on his property, and hence the Swifter Sifter was born. Now, another challenge too, as I was coming up with this, and this is the engineering mind. As I'm building the prototype, I come up with 50 million ways of making it better. Mm. And one thing I learned in one of the BNI podcasts that I was listening to that talked about MVP, minimally viable product. At some point I had to stop and say, come up with something that you can pitch the patent office, and then all the other ideas, which I didn't forget, go into version 2.0.
I see.
So a lot of times people come up and they say, well, it's never quite good enough. It's never quite good enough. If you have the idea, is the idea good enough? Because people who have done their own gardening, sift their own soil, they have the manual sifters that they chicken wire or hardware cloth on a wooden frame, and then they manually shake it or work it with a shovel or a rake. And then the next step up from there are the big diesel-powered sifters that they use at excavation sites.
Right.
Well, I came up with something that was in between. It's portable enough that an average person could pick it up by him or herself, and it folds. The legs fold flat, so you can hang it on the wall in the garage. Doesn't take up any real estate in the house. The legs can either stand on the ground, and because the legs are mid-mounted, they can stand on a wheelbarrow, so you can stiff directly into a wheelbarrow.
So you thought of a lot of different aspects of it, but you had to pitch the basic concept for your patent.
Correct. Well, that was all in the basic concept,
Gotcha.
And there's many ideas beyond that. And usually, as the attorney told me, that usually the patent office will reject one or two claims on a patent. My patent contained a total of 19 claims. All were allowed.
Wow.
Which was, in his words, very unusual. And a lot of times he said that the patent office typically will take 2 years before they can act on it. Or they'll wait 18 months before they act on it, and then another 6 months before they have a result. I had the result, and I believe I announced it that morning at BNI. I said, outside of myself, my wife, my attorney, and the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, that morning, June 7th, 2016, I was granted the U.S. patent.
That's awesome. Congratulations. I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. two things. One, BNI he's talking about, that's Business Networking International. That's a group that Rich and I used to belong to that is about growing your business. As a small business owner, it's a wonderful opportunity to get involved in. And number two, I just wanted to announce that you are listening to Inspiring Hope with Lois Herman. This is WSMN 1590, and I'm reminded that I need to let you guys know that because you're driving and you're like, who are these people talking? And I'm just wanting to let you know you can listen to us every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock where we are spotlighting different people. And today we're listening to I Am Lois Herman, but we're also speaking with Richard Kahn of Kahn Landscaping, who is an inventor, engineer, and a fabulous landscape architect. So tell us a little bit more about your invention. So you've created this Swifter Sifter and gotten a patent on it, which is exciting. Now, what happens when you get a patent? I know I have patents. Let me just say I have been named on patents, but the patents actually were owned by the corporations that I worked for. My brain, when I signed up with them, belonged to them. So I have the little plaques and everything that say I'm named on a patent, but they own the patent. What happens when you get your own patent, Rich?
Now the work begins.
I'd
like to say that because that goes to why, first of all, people don't get patents. And a simple utility patent, now when you get a patent through your employer, that's fun, that's the creative part, that's a lot of fun, but you're somewhat insulated from the cost of procuring that patent. A simple utility patent, as I have had from patent search to application to the final filing fees and the legal costs, was about $6,000. Mm-hmm. And sometimes what will happen is people have this great idea and then they start looking into the cost of procuring the patent on their own. And, oh, gosh. And that's $6,000 without a guarantee of a return on investment.
Correct.
Okay, now the work begins. Okay, the fun part, the creative part, getting the patent, that was a lot of fun, as I'm sure you know. But people will look at the cost and say, well, geez, I don't have that kind of money. And that's where you find out how much do you believe in your idea. The other thing is, and the reason people often don't get them, is they're a little bit naive. And a former coworker of mine, when I used to work at one of the big box stores, he told me he had the idea for putting wheels on camping coolers. Now, as you know, most big camping coolers nowadays have wheels on them. I have an old camping cooler that didn't come with wheels because last time my wife and I went camping was 1985. Okay, well, it has wheels now because I took some wheels off of a junk lawnmower and put them on my camping cooler.
Right.
Again, that's the repurposing thing. Well, this guy went to one of the big cooler manufacturers and he asked whether they thought it was a good idea. Big mistake. Oh, and they poo-pooed his idea. And of course, less than a year later, you see coolers with wheels on them. Mm-hmm. So people sometimes are naive and they don't say, geez, who should I ask to see whether it's a patentable idea?
So who should they ask? If somebody has an idea for something, who should they ask and not go to a competitor that might steal the idea? Because that's the whole purpose of a patent. From what I understand, you have a patent. So I have patents in my name now. The companies that own the patents would negotiate with other companies to sell the patents. Mm-hmm. So there's some negotiating that goes on when you own a patent. But the idea of owning a patent basically says that gives you the right to claim that invention. Tell us a little bit more about why would you want to own a patent?
It gives you legal protection for a fixed period of time from competition. And basically the patent doesn't necessarily protect the invention from being stolen, but it protects the market. There are U.S. patents, there are international patents. And if you get a U.S. patent and somebody infringes upon that patent, then you have some legal recourse to approach the person who is infringing. Now, usually what happens is you mentioned the patents that you have your name on, and your employer will sometimes not necessarily sell the patent or the right. They might license certain aspects of it. Mm-hmm. And if someone infringed upon my patent, first thing I would do is I would go to the attorney and say, would you negotiate on my behalf? And he or she would approach the infringer and say, look, we think we have an infringement here. We would like to negotiate with you for a licensing agreement. So maybe we can all be happy. Something not to be greedy, but hey, this guy invented this thing that you took the idea. Now, the person might say, well, I came up with it on my own before he did. And then there might be a court battle. But hopefully they avoid court, and that's the attorney's thought process, at least as it was relayed to me. They'll go to the person who's infringing and say, let's come up with a licensing agreement, this aspect or whatever, and they'll give me a royalty from every unit sold.
So it protects your right to your invention. It's kind of also like for me with writing a book. My book is copywritten, and because it is a series, it is also trademarked. So that protects other people from claiming the content or the information in the book. So it gives you the opportunity to say, this is my creative ability, my creation.
Oh, exactly. And if I wanted to, in my invention, I come, hey, I want to use this quote. Well, first thing I would do, if I know the author, I would say, may I use this quote or whatever in this context? And you would say either yes, no, or yes, but pay me a percentage. And there's usually some, infinite number of degrees of between an outright yes, you're welcome to use it, or no, you're not allowed to use it at all, somewhere in between.
You talked about a patent that you should have done that somebody in our region is famous for, the whole Velcro patent. Tell us about your story with Velcro.
Okay, I should have been the inventor of Velcro. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying if I had the mindset 50 years ago that I have now, I would have, when I'm walking through the woods near where I grew up, come home with these burrs attached to my clothing, and my mother would say, you take those off before you come into the house. I complain about it because I'm a child. Instead, I would have, my dad had a microscope around because he's an optometrist, and he had a microscope, and I would have said, went up to my room, taken the clothes off, looked at what is making that burr attach to the fabric, and I would have seen the burr has a little hook on the end of it, and the fabric has loops of the fabric, and hook and loop is the science behind Velcro. And as Velcro is a brand name, if you use that word Velcro, this is copyright and trademark. If you use the word Velcro, you have to pay royalties to Velcro USA, and the company. But the patent itself is expired now, because this was back in the 60s.
Interesting.
You can call yourself Hook and Loop, and you can create something that does exactly what Velcro does. So the patent doesn't give you unlimited protection, forever. But and I'll mention this, I worked at one of the big box stores, and there were some sanding discs one that said Velcro on them, and one that said hook and loop fastener. Same concept. So if I had known back when I was about 8 years old to what I know now, I would have looked at it and say, gee, hook and loop, and it makes it attach. I wonder if I could synthesize that. Because that's the kind of thought process I have now.
Right.
Anytime something bad happens, or any semi-negative experience, I say, what can I invent that would fix that problem?
I remember when my children were involved with the science projects and going to the different, and I think it was more along the lines of 8th grade. This was not high school based, but grammar school. And you'd go in and you'd see these inventions that they would make. I remember my daughter making a pillowcase that she could, with a pocket in it. She sewed a pocket into the pillowcase, so when she would go on sleepovers, she could tuck her pajamas and everything that she needed in this pocket. And so she'd have her pillow in her pocket and everything was right there. So it was interesting to go and see what the children come up with, because they have those imagination minds that they're not so stuck into this is what it is. They come up with these creative things all the time.
They haven't had their creativity squelched yet.
Exactly. And so I see so many of these things that come out, even like on places like Shark Tank, or people talk about they had this idea as a child and then it took them many years to create it or to manifest it. But looking at that, the inquisitive nature of children is wonderful, where they haven't been squelched. And then you had also mentioned that too, that a lot of people, if you were to approach people, they'll say, well, you can't do that. That's that negativity. And go with your inspired thought, because there's something there that's inspiring you to go down that path. What is it they say that Da Vinci, how many, and you probably know this better than I do, how many different designs did he have that never made it to fruition, but he kept recreating until there were certain things that did come to pass. The same thing with Edison and Tesla and some of the other great inventors had so many things that their creative minds would create, but only certain of them would come to fruition.
Well, you asked about positive quotes, too, of various people, and I got so many running through my head at any one moment. Sometimes it's hard to latch onto it. And Edison, when he was asked about, as he was developing what we know as the electric light bulb today, how did it feel to fail, and the exact numbers of some debate, how does it feel to have failed 1,000 times? And he said, I didn't fail 1,000 times. I successfully found 1,000 ways that didn't work.
Perfect. Wonderful way of reframing.
And so basically you were also asking about what should a person do if he or she has a good idea that may or may not be patentable. I would say go to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and poke around, and I can't speak for them, but I think they would help you say, how do I use this? If you don't know how to do what's called a Boolean search, they probably could tell you this is what, on a high level, how it works. Also, with any you could just use almost any search engine and just type in portable powered sifter and see what pops up. You'll probably come up with some YouTube videos, and you'll probably come up with, I don't know if you'll come up with anything from the patent office, but do any of those things. Go to an inventor who, someone you know, or someone who's got that creative mind who you trust that wouldn't dump negative on you. The other thing is, and it may cost money, is go to an attorney and ask the attorney, short of paying the $1,000 plus to do a professional patent search, say, spend an hour of their time, if you can spend $300, just to be told, no, there's too many things like it that might infringe. Because I had several things that I've pursued that are potentially infringing, and I spent, this was several years ago, first time was $600, and the professional patent search came back, said, no, it's probably not patentable. And then another idea I had, and then it was $700. And most recently is I came up with the idea for, my wife has a mobility issue. And what would happen is if we were in the rain, of course I would hold the umbrella for her. Well, I didn't want to get wet either. So, and what if she has to go somewhere in the rain by herself? So I came up with a system of attachments for her walker, which you can put a tube in there and it'll hold the umbrella upright, and you can adjust the umbrellas to different heights, and you can put like a tray if she's sitting on it. It's got one of the you can put like a food tray on it.
Yeah, it's kind of like the wheelchairs. When working in the hospital for years, the wheelchairs would have the IV pole in the back that would, hang an IV bag or something like that. But you could affix an umbrella to it. I like that.
Well, and it's and I have some pictures up on my Facebook page. And the thing is, I spent, and that was like $1,250 to do the professional patent search, and it came back, there's probably some possibly infringing ideas on it. But I came up with it without looking at somebody else's thing, and then personally I think mine's better anyway, but better is not the issue. The only issue, it's does it infringe?
In other words, has somebody else applied for the patent first. So the concept is if you apply for a patent and you are approved, it's first in and first approved. Is that correct?
Yes.
Even if the concepts are similar.
Yeah, that is correct. And some of these patents were actually granted because before I went to the attorney, I poked around on YouTube and I poked around on the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and a lot of times it's knowing the correct search terms, because there is a little bit of a linguistic knowledge there that's involved in what search term do you put in. Because if you read the patent for my invention, they're written in legalese.
Yes, they're very, yes, they're not normal speak.
And it says, I don't even remember my own patent. Portable powered sifter is constructed to be portable by a single individual with a plurality of side members.
Oh, sure, yeah.
It's legal speak.
So, Rich, can you let us know how would people find out about your inventions? What is your website? Where would they find you?
It's actually most likely on my Facebook page. There's two places. I have actually two LLCs. There's Kahn Landscaping LLC and
KAHN
Landscaping LLC and Kahn Equipment LLC.
Okay.
And or possibly on my personal page, you'll see a picture of me with my son and two granddaughters. So that's how you know you're at the right place. So you can contact me through either of the Facebook groups or my personal page, and it's U.S. patent number 9,358,583.
Oh my goodness, you remember that number.
Well, when I get as many patents as Dean Kamen, I probably won't remember them all, but the 9,358,583. If you type into any search engine U.S. patent 9,358,583, you'll probably get a whole bunch of items, including the actual one from the patent office.
So you are listening to Inspiring Hope with Lois Herman at WSMN 1590. And in this show, we are inspiring you to do different things by talking to people who have followed their inspiration, their passion, their drive in their life. And Rich Kahn is sharing with us about his drive for creative abilities and the things that he's done, and even taken it so far as to get patents. So even if you don't get a patent, the possibility of doing what your desire is, to be creative, to get creative, that's the key, is to allow your mind to take you down some journeys that you would not expect if you were just to stay the course. So many people in this day and age are so stuck in the social media or watching TV or things like that they're missing that creative piece of getting out in nature and exploring the what ifs. And so Rich has made a lifetime of between himself and his son. He's had a lifetime of creative pursuits. So what else have you done, Rich, that inspire you and that you would encourage others to be inspired to do?
Well, where do I begin? That's part of the challenge. I'm trying to think. I could start with the first thing that I really earnestly pursued a patent on, but anything that you have fun doing, and again, I have fun making stuff out of stuff. To me, just going to the store to buy the materials is not the same thing. I enjoy taking things that are other people's cast-offs. Again, clocks is just one of those things.
They say that one person's trash is another person's treasure.
Exactly.
And I know that one of the things in New England that is kind of a unique thing in New England is the transfer stations. And when you go to the transfer stations, the dump, if you will, they oftentimes will have a separate shed that have things that people have given that are useful. And you can find all kinds of cool old things there, or consignment shops, or the Goodwill. It's amazing the things that you can find at these places that I consider are wonderful recycle places. Instead of going and buying new, you can find a lot of wonderful treasures at these other places.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. Two things. I have two very nice gas barbecue grills. I didn't pay for either one of them, and it was actually between landscaping customers. When I came across one of them that I use mostly now, and I'm trying to picture, what did this guy replace it with? I mean, it must have been something pretty fantastic. I was on the way to a customer's, from one customer to another, and I was with the guy working for me, and I said, I don't have room. I have to dump what's in my back of my dump truck first. So I said, David, I'm going to go to get you started at this customer. I'm going to go back and get that barbecue grill once I dump the load. And that was one thing I've done. The other thing is I have a friend and neighbor in my hometown of Hudson who knows of my propensity for creating stuff, and she'll give me a call and say, I've got this that used to belong to my son and my husband. And one of the things that I ended up taking was a plastic slide that when her son used to have a tree fort. And I said, yeah, I just look at the stuff, some of the stuff she has, and I said, if something strikes me that I might have a use for it someday, I'll take it. And what I did was I took that plastic slide I had, because we filled in our in-ground pool, and I had an aluminum ladder that used to go into the pool. I took the ladder, combined it with the slide, and I made a little slide for my granddaughter and gave it to my son. And stuff like that.
It's interesting. I think that there's something to do with an engineering mind. My husband has an engineering mind as well. I call it MacGyvering. He will come up with different ways of doing things, and it fascinates me to watch him create a pulley and lever system to lift something on his own, instead of having somebody else come, and he knows how to connect those dots. I know, like I said, there was a show called MacGyver that had all kinds of cool little gizmos, and so I have coined, or maybe other people have coined that phrase, but he MacGyvers things all the time, and it fascinates me how his mind works to create those things to help him be more efficient.
MacGyver was a proper noun, which became a verb.
Yes, exactly.
I didn't come up with that term either, and it's funny you should mention that, because I had watched the show, but that was the only time I ever binge-watched. Let me phrase that. The first time I had ever binge-watched a TV show was the classic MacGyver.
Right.
And, of course, the new MacGyver is a show that I watch now as well. But the classic MacGyver, I just boom, 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 watched all 7 seasons of it in, I don't know, just 2 months. And so MacGyver, yes, I would say I definitely identify with the MacGyver. Come up with a task, and I know one of my former co-members, if you will, of the BNI group, I think he paid homage. He came up with a rake that he used in his masonry business, and he called it Frankenrake. And I said, yes. And then he did pay homage to me on that. I said, yeah. I appreciated it. Even if they're kind of teasing me a little bit, I really appreciate when people acknowledge that making stuff out of stuff drive that I have.
Yeah, I think it's important, because one of the other tenets of the book, The Chronicles of Hope, is to be conservative with our resources. And we put so much in our landfills, and that could be reused. And, with a stitch here, a stitch there in fabric or clothing, or shoes or whatever, just to repurpose what we have, and to take what we have and come up with better ways or creative ways of doing it. If you were to come to my office, and again, this is Lois Herman, you're listening to Inspiring Hope. If you were to come to my office, all of the furniture in my office was procured either at a consignment place or at the Habitat Restore. I love that store. I've mentioned them before. And there people donate their cast-off things, and you can go in and get beautiful things for a fraction of the price. Maybe you need to clean it. Maybe you need to refinish it or something. It doesn't matter. It's instead of going out and spending premium on something new that may not be the same quality, construction quality, is to use some of these resources that we have and inspire ourselves to be creative. One of the things that my daughter has done, she's restoring an old house, and she's taken a bureau and she refinished it. It was an old cast-off bureau. A lot of the things that the New England people do is they'll put something that they don't want at the side of the road. which I think is also great. And she picked this up at the side of the road and she turned it into a vanity, cut a hole in the middle, sunk a sink into it. It turned into a beautiful credenza or a vanity for her powder room. And so you can get really creative with old things.
Well, one of the things I'm glad you brought that up too, because I'm on the town sustainability committee. It's an appointed committee, and basically it's to promote energy efficiency and recycling in the town. And one of the things besides doing and participating in all the things that the committee already does, like they do 2 roadside cleanups a year, I wanted to promote in the town that not only is recycling and repurposing fun or good for the environment, but it's fun and potentially can even pay well, because the original prototype for my invention was made almost entirely from repurposed materials, including the electric motor that makes it vibrate.
Wow.
So I wanted to let people know in the town that this was a thing that it's not just good for the environment, but it's fun and potentially can pay well.
And it's good to be creative. It stimulates that mind. We are creative beings, and we need to stimulate that creativity, because it's in the act of creating that keeps us engaged in life. It's when we give up, when we don't think, when we just get into that mire of negativity that causes us to sink into what many call depression, sadness, and apathy. But when we're stimulated to create, it's good for our body, mind, and our spirit. It's wonderful.
I want to ask you, though, where do you think that I know it can happen just 2 people on the street, but where do you think, or when do you think children lose that creative drive? Somewhere, as children, when they're still living with their parents, is it the parents that might be negative? Is it the school system? Is it their friends? How does that work?
Yes, and yes. I do a lot of regression work in the hypnosis work that I do, and I will take people back to their earliest happy memory, and it's usually 2 or 3 or 4, and they're playing in the dirt, and they're just content as can be. It's when they get into the rigid structure of a school system that says you have to do it this way. It squelches the creativity, and that's when so many people have issues that they start in that early school system. Now, our more modern school systems are seeming to be a bit more open and more creative with students, but you're in my generation, Rich, right. We especially, and in some of the schools, they were so rigid. I remember even my dad was a lefty. And he went to parochial schools, and the nun would hit him on the hand with a ruler when he would use his left hand, and he had to learn to write with his right hand. But any sport he played with his left hand, because there wasn't somebody there to hit him on the hand with the ruler. So it's that need to conform, to enforce people's opinions, and it has to be done a certain way. That's what squelches the creativity.
Well, I'm glad you meant that, because I have 50 million stories, which I know.
Go ahead. We
have 50 million stories, and we were running low on time. But one story that I told a lot about had to do with Lefty. I was subbing in a 6th grade class, and I had just got done writing the homework assignment on the board, and this boy in the front row had a cast on his right arm, his dominant arm. And he says, well, Mr. Khan, I can't do because you showed me. So what I did was I recopied the assignment verbatim with my left hand. It came out neater.
You are listening to Inspiring Hope. Thank you so much, Rich, for being on today. And I hope you're inspired to be creative, to tap into that creative mind. And join us next week for our Inspiring Hope with Lois Herman show at WSMN 1590. You can find me at loisherman.com or chroniclesofhope.net. Click our social media icons and join us next week, when we will shine the light on another very special guest who will share their inspiring story of hope. Meanwhile, look up, stay positive, and be the light in someone's day.